Facing an injury and curious if you can continue training? Is it safe to train through pain? Join Yanni and I today with a sports physio discussing the science of pain and training smartly amidst challenges. But real quick, before we get started, if you listen to our podcast, you know that we put a lot of effort into putting out great content for you guys for free. And the only ask that we have is if you could please share it with your friends. So if you could just take a moment right now, click that share button, copy the link and forward it to someone that you think will get value out of it. It would mean the world to us and it'll only take a moment of your time. So please do that right now. Hit that share button and forward it on. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Rab Burmeister. Today I am joined by an OG, Phil White, aka Dr. Phil, who is our resident physiotherapist and all things injury and pain science. And today we're talking about pain science. It is something that Phil is very passionate about. It's something that he's done a lot of work studying, and it's something that has really helped my brother Yanni and I, and by extended family, our whole UMS tribe, to understand what pain science is, how you can use that understanding to overcome a lot of really bad injuries and get back to doing what you love. Welcome to the show, Phil.
G'day, stoked to be back. Loving, being back on the show after a little hiatus.
Yeah, it's good times. So today we're talking about, we decided we were going to talk about pain science first.
Don't I get an introduction?
No, you don't get an intro.
Who's that guy?
You can talk in a minute, Yanni. We're talking about one of our near and dear members.
Totally been relegated with Phil back. I'm
that's
no
right.
longer the smart and good-looking person.
Well,
that's
if you didn't know, Yanni's
place.
my brother. He's the co-founder of Unity Gym, and he's the guy that sits in the background and does all the really fun stuff to manage our business and pull the strings. But we get him on the podcast every now and then. And today we're talking about pain science, and we're talking about one of our members who recently had a hip replacement at the young age of, I think, about 67 or 2 case studies. But this is Patrick here, who I'm pretty sure is 68 years old. He's a trauma surgeon in America. I can't remember which part. And this video is only about 3 months after having a complete hip replacement. And he's out there deadlifting, he's squatting. I'll find a video of him doing some squats again soon. But the idea of that we want to talk about is that, well, Phil, why don't you talk to us about what
so pain science, but like specifically this idea around the injury identity, which is something that I've talked a little bit about, and I can't remember if I got it from someone or if I coined it myself, but it does seem to connect with people, and I've written
you coined
a bit
it
about
yourself,
it
man. Own it.
We're going to go with you coining it yourself, mate, because I certainly got it from you.
Yeah, but it's been really nice because like instantly people identify with it, because it's something that I really experienced in my years of growing up as a person who loved sport, played competitive sport at like international level, but then I was always like the injured guy, and I always just really struggled with like that. Just became part of who I was, and every time anyone asked me how I was doing, they're like, "Oh, how are your injuries?" And then I started to feel like I was just this, broken person who, by the end of my like time playing that sport, just felt like that was me done, and I would just be sedentary and sore for the rest of my life. So it's been something that I've personally overcome and really like identified that identity that I'd adopted from just feeling so like institutionalized through being at the doctor or the physio getting scans constantly and just feeling so broken. And it wasn't really until I finding Unity Gym and feeling that confidence I got from training again and feeling like my body was actually getting stronger, getting better, and I noticed that everything started to hurt less, and I was able to feel that identity shift from someone who was very broken to being someone who is just, confident and happy and enjoying sport again. So it's been a bit of a journey personally. And then I've just seen it pop up so many times with my clients.
Yeah. And why don't you talk to us about what pain science is?
Yeah. So pain is just such an interesting topic that I will endeavor to succinctly
well, before you go into it,
So
let me just preface what I would like to say. We have injuries, and injuries is, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, is what you call pathology. It's what we see on a report. It's is that the right terminology?
Yeah, I mean, like terminology-wise, injury. Yeah, I mean, like changes to morphology is basically this idea that you've got like an injury where it's a structural damage to your muscles, your bones, your joint, your tendon, whatever. So that's going to be the changes to morphology, and that may or may not have a impact on your pain and your function. So it's sort of disconnecting this idea that any damage and injury has to have like a lasting effect on your pain. And it's also differentiating between this idea of pain versus suffering. So having a pain experience that is there, but you're able to understand it, versus suffering, which is pain experience that then stops you from doing what you love doing. So I think those distinctions help navigate this space.
Yeah, and I mean,
Sorry, Rad, can I jump in and say that this...
you're not allowed to talk.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to say anything. I had the most profound experience following my education around pain science. Phil and I did a hell of a lot of podcasting shows specifically on this. We did a whole series years ago. You can go back. I don't remember what episodes they are, but they're in the 400 odd episodes of podcasts we've got. And we did a whole week every day of a series on this. And you know, it's funny. I had a really profound experience after knowing this. You know, this concept of associating pain to risk and perceived risk, and then when you understand that pain is not always a reflection of risk, and when you no longer perceive the scenario as being a risk of you becoming more injured, more sick, more damaged, whatever, then often you can actually consciously turn that pain down. Now, I have learned a lot about this from reading the work of Norman Doidge, who has written a couple of quite prolific books. The Brain's Way of Healing and The Brain That Changes Itself are two that come to mind that I've got in my bookshelf. But I never really understood the concepts until Phil laid them out in, you know, I'm more of an audible listener, a learner and physical learner. I need to do things. I need to feel things. I need to taste them to really understand them, as opposed to just reading them in books. Now, I had this one experience one night where I burnt myself. It was a very small, superficial burn on my hand. I was cooking. And, you know, shortly after I had to go to bed, and burns are a real pain in the ass when you've just done them, they're fresh, and you go to bed and you're just sitting there going, oh man, this is annoying. You know, I can't get to sleep because this damn thing's hurting so much. And then I thought, you know what, I'm just going to actually really consciously disassociate from this, and because the reality is that there was no risk of the burn getting any worse or causing any more damage or harm to my body. And I sort of, you could say, and all of the, you know, people that aren't very spiritual might just freak out right now, but you could say that I almost meditated on it. I very, very consciously made myself aware of the fact that there was no more risk to my body, and that this burn, that the pain I was experiencing will soon pass as soon as my body sort of comes to terms with the fact that I'm no longer at risk. And it was an instant response, The pain went from a 7 out of 10 to about a 3 out of 10. I could still feel it, but it was no longer keeping me awake at night, and I just fell off to sleep. And it was the most bizarre sort of experience, because I've never even experienced that before. Now, the stuff that I'd read about pain science, especially in Norman Doidge's book, The Brain's Way of Healing, they're talking about phantom pain and having to overcome phantom pain, which is along the same sort of path here.
Phantom pain is when you have a limb missing and you still experience symptoms and sensations, including pain from a missing limb. So.
Exactly. And it's a very common issue for our vets, for soldiers who have been to war or suffered like serious injuries where they've had a leg blown off or an arm blown off or something like that. And there's clinics around the world that are dealing with this, because no amount of pain meds that you can take, painkillers, solve this problem, you know. And what they're finding is that this is the only way that they can deal with it, is to retrain the brain to disassociate from this pain. And it starts with a fundamental understanding of just basic pain science. So all I wanted to say before we continue is that this is quite profound, and I've experienced it firsthand myself. And since that period that we spent talking about this years ago, I've been able to really, really consciously dial down the pain volume dial that you've spoken about before as a metaphorical term quite effectively on many occasions, you know. Anyway.
Yes, I love that framing, but I also want to really reinforce the idea of pain science is not so much that you're able to decide to hurt less. It usually comes with proving to yourself via your actions and your beliefs like changing over time, that's when you start to decrease pain. So yeah, definitely the takeaway, I hope, shouldn't be that you just need to sit there and think your way out of it, because it's very hard to think your way out of beliefs.
It's the secret.
Yeah, but I think like super interesting, like a really interesting example of how Yanni's used it in very like a practical, like short-term actionable way. But I think where this really comes into its own is when you're suffering with a chronic pain scenario where which has really led to a lot of suffering. So changing, the way you live and change the way you think and how you feel, and being able to work through that. So that's just a little comment on Yanni's stuff there, but also just a framing of how to think about this as being useful. So to go on from there, this came about as being the first thing we learned when I started my Doctor of Physio postgrad degree. Was they started a whole week just on pain science, because like they really wanted to frame everything that we did going forward through this lens of it's all about your brain and your nervous system, and how the interaction between, I guess, what information is coming in is then processed through your sort of your metabolic state. So in situations where you're in like a highly stressed systemic inflammation state, that's going to turn the volume up of that signal coming in through your body. In a endorphin-like state, that's going to turn the volume down, so less signal coming up through the spinal cord into the brain. And then once the information arrives at your brain, then it's processed through your thoughts, moods, beliefs, and your fears. And that outcome is then a pain experience. So that's why surgery works with anesthesia, is because you just turn your brain off and then you don't experience pain. So although they're doing things to you that would like very much hurt if you're conscious and awake, like you don't experience that pain because your brain's switched off. So pain is an output, and it's the perceived threat of the information coming via your nerves.
So just quickly, if I could just guide this to a really practical outcome for the listener. We showed this segment of one of our clients, a case study here, and we discussed. We didn't really frame why we were showing that in relation to pain science. So why don't you now just share your case study, because you've worked with a client who had some issues around this, and then really talk about why someone like Patrick Offner, who we showed before, could return so quickly to doing exercises that some people would be terrified of doing after having hip replacement surgery,
Yeah, for sure. So the reason I think it's useful to have framed it in this like idea of your pain experience being your perceived threat. When I talked about your thoughts, moods, beliefs, identity, like all of these factors influence how threatening your brain perceives the information. So when discussing what we're talking today, like we decided to talk about this idea of an injury identity. And identity is something that just is a real shortcut for your brain to basically entrench like your certain beliefs and then process information in a much like faster way than having to go through your kind of logical, rational brain, which takes a bit longer to process information. So when you have these really ingrained beliefs and identity, that just does like a total shortcut where it gets to bypass logic and then have the outcome. So when you've got these beliefs that you're a broken person who is like got an injury that will lead to suffering for the rest of your life and you won't be able to do the things you love, that reinforcing of the identity by having surgery, getting these MRI reports that are just all in Latin jargon that totally freak you out, and being told that you need to be really careful, and the experience and the beliefs you've had from people around you who've gone through similar things, and that was the end of their positive approach to exercise. Like with all of those things, it just shortcuts your brain into thinking, hey, this information coming from my area that I'm concerned about is such a threat to my very being that injury identity is then just going to leave you in a state where it's very hard to get past a chronic pain situation. So that I think is where we sort of want to frame this is like this Patrick, who's had a hip replacement and then got back into squatting and deadlifting within 2 months. He's really fought that injury identity by taking the kind of consistent actions that align with the person he wants to be, which is someone who's fit and active. And then by proving to his brain via this actions, and obviously as a surgeon, he has a really good, understanding of all this stuff. And I know that he's, I think, learned a bit from even, us talking about our experiences and some of this science from a very new perspective. Like that has then helped him process that information that's coming from his area of surgery, the hip, and helping his brain not see that as a threat. Like normal loading signal as a threat.
Hey, if you're enjoying this podcast, I've got something that I think you'll get a lot of value out. It's called the Flexibility Blueprint, and it's an incredible course that Yanni and I have created to teach people all about stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 flexibility. They are different. Like if you're a beginner at stage 1, you don't want to be trying to train like somebody who's more advanced at stage 2 or stage 3. And the Flexibility Blueprint teaches you all of that, how to identify what stage you're at and how to take action so that you can level up in 28 days. It's totally free. In fact, it's the best free content we've ever created. And you'll see a link in the description for this podcast. So go and grab that. It's going to change your life, I promise you. And if it doesn't, you can tell me and I'll figure out how I can change your life for the better. Yeah, and that's something that I learned a lot from you about as well, Phil, when I was dealing with my slap tears. Because when I first started doing my training, I could barely lift my arm past there without agonizing pain. And so you taught me how to be able to train within the pain-free range, but just testing that range, and then to use progressive overload, which is something that, because I'm a coach and I have decades of experience training, this terminology makes sense to me, and I'm able to absorb this information and then apply it to something that I understand. But using progressive overload for me was starting with really, really light weights and then gradually increasing the amount of reps I could do, and then I'd up the weight a little bit. And then, Phil would say to me, why don't we try just a little bit of an increased range now? So going from example, from a flat chest press to a 15-degree incline chest press, which means that instead of my arms pushing here, they're now pushing to here. So it's just pushing slightly further into that range. And I had pain in most training sessions, but Phil would talk me through it. He'd ask me all these different questions about the pain that I wasn't really getting at the time, but it was always about my experience, and I can't exactly remember the questions, but he wanted to know a lot.
The questions are a lot around this idea of irritability, and irritability is a really good way of saying, like, is the pain that you're experiencing acute pain? Because acute pain is so useful. Like, it is a very useful thing that your body experiences pain to protect you and to make sure that you don't do things that are going to cause like lasting damage. But where it starts to become unhelpful, and I think there's some really interesting medical conditions where people don't experience pain and they usually die quite young because they just don't get that feedback and they don't respond to the feedback of what they're doing in their environment or illness or sickness. So acute pain is so useful, and the reason why you get swelling and extreme pain around like a rolled ankle, for example, is like it's a really bad idea to keep loading this structure that doesn't need load. It needs a bit of time for the inflammation process to go through, for the healing mediators to then send all of like the different like healing factors to then go through that natural course of healing. It's when you then become so scared about loading it again that you spend the next 5 months in a boot, and then anytime your body like has got so used to such little information coming back through that area that as soon as you start to try and do something normal again, like that is just suddenly exceeding your threshold for what your brain's got used to, and it's seen as a really big threat. And if you've got these thoughts, moods, beliefs that you're a broken person who can't ever run again, or you've seen these scans with like screws going through your foot from a surgery, like all of these things really play into this idea that you've got a lot of threat. So being able to know if the pain experience the symptoms you're getting, so that idea of irritability is how intense does it get, how long does it settle, how long does it stay, and how long does it take to settle down, versus and generally if you're on the higher end of all of those three things, it's going to be something that is like, okay, there's probably, especially if it's taking a long time to settle down, there's probably some systemic inflammation, or just inflammation process going through, or something suggesting it is still quite acute. But if it's just like a weird stab of pain that is a bit intense and then it goes away immediately, or pretty low level and resolves really quickly, then you probably have a bit more confidence that you can push on. But again, working with a professional who can guide you through it in your particular circumstance is really important. But I think Brad talking about this idea of going through the progressive overload process and getting that feedback from me is just a really nice example of that idea that unlike Yanni, who managed to think his way out of pain, you generally can't sit there. It's like if I sat here and decided that if I told myself okay, I'm going to convince myself that flat earthers have it right and it's real, it would be impossible for me to sit here and change my beliefs that the earth is round. It would be very hard for me to just decide to change my beliefs in that way. Even if someone had told me and they seem trustworthy, it'd be very hard for me to just decide that suddenly. But with this idea of like working through progressive overload, it's taking these actions, taking these steps that then you give yourself so much evidence that your beliefs change because you've seen, hey, I've done this thing that was initially scary and I'm better for it. Like that accumulation of evidence is what you need to then change your identity. And so,
so for a flat earther, that might be just traveling a little bit further.
That analogy didn't work too well because then I had to like link it to then a flat earther.
No, that's
correct.
a great analogy.
Actually, the other way around. If I was a flat earther, yeah.
No, it's a good analogy. I don't know. A lot of our listeners probably don't know this, but when we were at 1.5 meter social distancing in COVID, a lot of people don't know this, but flat earthers actually feared that if we went to 2 meter social distancing, it might push some people over the edge.
Oh dear. But yeah, briefly moving on, like I think there's just a really nice example of this in action with one of my clients who I worked with recently who, similar age to Patrick, so 67, he had a hip replacement that he then got the feedback from his initial surgeon that something had gone a bit wrong. It hadn't taken properly. So he went and traveled, like he's in England, traveled into Wales to get like a second opinion from this professor surgeon who, was an authority on this particular type of surgery, had all these scans and was just completely overwhelmed by the whole experience. And he was someone who, for his retirement, was looking forward to going on these multi-day hikes and cycling around Europe and with his daughter around New Zealand for his retirement and just having, a very active approach to life. And then this just like totally shook him and just, it felt like, this life that he dreamed of and this identity that he had was just like completely slipping away. And so I started working with him as an online only client. So didn't do any poking, prodding, taping, needling, nothing. But what I did was just help him first understand like his experience of going through talking to surgeons, being able to help him work through his like surgical report and his MRI and just explain what all of the, scary sounding stuff that, when you read Latin, everything sounds bad. Like it just sounds like it's it's very serious, but being able to actually, help him understand what a lot of that meant. And then we just very gradually decided to just increase his exercise tolerance by doing very simple things. And then once he had the confidence that he could do, the very simple thing, we just added a bit more and then added a bit more and added a bit more with the context of what different symptoms mean and knowing what to look out for. And so, this isn't going to be the experience for everyone in his situation, but within 4 weeks, he had gone from taking 6 painkillers a day to no longer taking any, and was back to like hiking every morning with his dog and then doing some basic strength work that we were doing together. And then, after 12 weeks, he went off on a trip cycling around Europe where he was doing between 60 and 140K a day, usually around 80. And cycled around Europe solo and just had a great time. So for the whole month. And it was just so nice to see, someone who like was just caught up in the like, the fear of what like over medicalization and a healthcare system that often finds it hard to like help guide people through this in a way because just in the NHS, there's not the funding for it and you can't see people regularly enough. And in private stuff in Australia, it's often hard to kind of step-by-step work people through this. So it's very nice that, with my new business model, I can actually spend that time and have that like personal connection that can mean that he can sort of trust and work through in the same way that I guess I helped Rad with in the gym.
Yeah, I love that because it really is it was definitely a big part of my recovery was just the reinforcing belief that this is okay and you're not destroying yourself. What you're feeling is okay, and getting that reinforced from a physiotherapist like you, Phil, was a huge part of my rehab because I remember when I initially had my injury and I had that diagnosis and I was looking at the report or having the report read to me, I definitely went through those phases of, oh my God, is this it for me? Am I ever going to be able to do the things that I love again? And I felt that for a while. And it was through your constant reinforcement and you always just looked at me with a smile and said, it's okay, we're just going to keep doing this and you're getting better and blah, blah, blah.
I just like to treat it with like a light curiosity and, treat it like an experiment with how you're going. Like, obviously that means you're just testing a hypothesis and then you're getting the feedback and you're working with it. And so it's not this like, I guess it's like that lightheartedness is, just trying to take a bit of like the heat out of it because it's such an emotional thing. And I know what it means to be injured and not be able to do what you love. And so kind of trying to just change that intensity around it to make it less threatening, to treat it with curiosity, and then like over time give yourself so much evidence that you can't ignore it.
Yeah, and it works. And it's something that Yanni and I adopted from having this experience with Phil and with a couple of other exceptional physiotherapists that we've worked with, that Yanni and I really adopted this philosophy in the way that we coach people in the UMS, and people get incredible results from it. So, thanks, Phil, for all that you share with us and for being able to, to help and guide us through.
Can I, sorry, before you start to wind this up, can I just add another really practical case study to this concept, which I use very regularly? Those who know our stories know that both Rad and I have come into the exercise world with a very, very severe or serious back compromise, spinal compromise. I fell off a horse when I was a kid and really, really messed up my lower back. And Rad has spondylolisthesis and ended up with a pars fracture that was discovered after a big fall in the military. And, often I'm very susceptible to quite nasty back spasm. There's no major change, and I've had such profound for a period of time going back decades before I was working with Phil. When I'd get a back spasm this bad, I would end up in hospital, and then they'd do MRIs, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing new wrong. There's still damage that shows up in my MRI of my spine from the past injury, but that's decades old now, multiple decades old now, and pretty much all but sorted itself out. And I'm talking spinal fractures. It's not a small thing. There was a series of fractures to 3 of the vertebrae in my lower back. Now, one of the things that since working with Phil, he used to talk about this concept of motion is lotion, and I just checked to see if I had the T-shirt on because I trained in the T-shirt earlier. We ended up coining this phrase and putting it on a T-shirt because we loved it so much.
It was actually originally coined by a pain scientist who is very famous and well known, and it's his term. So we'll just attribute it.
It didn't originally come from Phil, but I heard it from Phil the first time, and we were the ones that put it on a T-shirt. So nowadays, when I get a back spasm, and they do occur from time to time, maybe once or twice a month, and some of them are so bad that it's hard to walk. You know what I do? I deadlift it out. And we have this little saying in Unity Gym, if in doubt, deadlift it out. And what I do is I go to the gym.
My disclaimer, or is it?
No. Let me finish, then you can give your disclaimer. Now, of course, this is relevant to me because I am already very strong and capable, but it's the most bizarre thing. I can take an enormous amount of painkillers, muscle relaxants, whatever, and get like a mild effect where it'll be now comfortable to lie on the couch and binge Netflix and feel sorry for myself, and that will be tolerable. Or I can hobble up to the gym and do a deadlift session. And now, of course, I'm not going to be aiming for like setting PBs and things like that. I'll regress my weight. Let's say hypothetically I'm doing 5x5 at 180 kilograms. I don't know what that is in pounds, but it's a reasonable amount, probably 400 pounds. That's what I would be doing prior to the back spasm. What I will do is go, okay, let's try and do a 5x5 at 140 kilograms and work up to it very slowly. And with each new weight that I put on the bar, I'll just see how it feels. Do one of these little thought experiments that Phil's saying, how did that feel? Okay, yep, I'm feeling good. I'll add a little bit more weight. I'll add a little bit more weight. I'll add a little bit more weight. Now, I can't remember a time that this didn't work. 9 times out of 10, I will leave that workout because once your body warms up, your pain threshold also increases quite profoundly. But I walk out of that workout, and even when I've cooled down again, the pain is either gone or massively reduced. And it is majority this concept of sort of reinforcing to the brain that you're okay, you're not compromised for whatever reason why that muscle spasm was occurring. It's now sort of been, confirmed that you are okay, you're not at risk, everything's good. And I use this strategy all the time now. Whenever I have a bit of a spasm occurring in the back, and it's usually in my lumbar erectors, erector spinae, or QL muscle on one side or both sides. It can be in the intercostals or muscles around the ribs or even lats or something like that. And it's usually nasty, mate. Like, it's hard to take a deep breath. It's that bad. But after a little deadlift session, sub-maximal weights, and really, really taking it slowly, disclaimer, I come back and I feel great. Phil, you can finish.
Yeah, so just to chuck the disclaimer in there, like I think it's important again to recognize Yanni's context of being very experienced, one, with his injury and really knowing like morphologically, so what's happening in the body. So from his previous scan and time with medical appointments, and then also understanding, what his body can do in terms of strength. So I think like for him, that's a really great example, which I wouldn't encourage for people who maybe hadn't had as much experience deadlifting. And certainly like if you don't know initially what's going on with it, you really want to make sure that's where you start. So do work with a professional to like understand what's going on, understand what symptoms to look out for, and then know, when you're progressing, what are the variables that are most likely to be challenging for your body, and then really incrementally work your way up through there. And I think, you can definitely take that principle of what Yanni's done there and then apply it in a slightly, less risky for a general person by thinking about like, if you have a shoulder injury, go out and do like a hard cycling session on a spin bike, or, do a lower body strength workout that, really leaves you feeling, pretty sore. Like push yourself in these other avenues. And that's a nice way of like just giving yourself that kind of identity and confidence of someone who like, no, I still like am very capable. I still can do things that make me feel like I'm progressing. And that just starts to play into, again, that psychology of, that you're a capable person who doesn't need to lose everything, and it helps with that positive health spiral that I've talked about, where it just keeps your motivation going, which makes it easy to keep exercising, which manages your sleep well, which is going to then have positive effects on your pain. It's going to make your stress better, which is then also going to have positive effects on your pain. When you're managing your stress, you're probably going to eat better, which is going to have positive effects on your pain. And then it's all this like, and that works in your body composition, which again will have positive metabolic effects, which will have positive effects on your pain. So it's this like good spiral of like both mental like belief based things, and then also like physiological knobs to turn up and turn down on your pain experience.
Awesome.
Yeah, so just one last little bit there with, I just wanted to chuck in a fact, which I sort of forgot to mention when I was talking about that idea of information coming from your nervous system up into your brain. Really important thing to understand is that you don't have pain receptors. You have lots of different types of information, so pressure, temperature, like chemical changes, and there is something called nociceptors, which people often misattribute as pain receptors, but they're actually like damage and threat receptors. So just really important to understand here that like you don't have pain receptors, it's what your brain processes from that information. So I think just having that like understanding then just helps you reframe why this like mental side of things can change your and physiological, like turning up and turning down the knobs, can have such a profound effect on the pain you experience. Because it's not like you're activating a pain receptor and getting a certain response. It's all of this processing by your brain trying to figure out how to help you best.
Perfect. Great show, guys, and great to have you back, Phil. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to more episodes. If you got value out of this, like and subscribe to our channel, and leave us a comment if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer. We always answer people's questions from within the UMS Tribe membership first, but if we don't have any of those, then we go to our YouTube and our social media audiences. So if you've got anything,
I'm writing an article a day at the moment on Twitter. Generally like a 300, 500 word, just trying to get one key concept across. And so I'm always looking for things to write about. So any of your comments put on the videos, or if you send me a message and add me on Twitter and request something, I'm definitely happy to.
At Phil White Physio on Twitter?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's right. And
beautiful. And if you want to, if you are somebody that wants to overcome a lot of your pain, if you're a little bit further along the journey and you don't need your hand held as much, you can come and join the UMS Tribe membership, where we write custom programs for everybody and get great results. And if you want to work with Phil, you can find Phil at philwhite.me, and for us, we're at unitygym.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah.